Mike? Yep. Okay, so joining us tonight from his bedroom, quarantined, is Father James Martin. Father Martin is a Jesuit priest, writer, and editor-at-large of American Magazine. In 2017, Pope Francis appointed Father Martin as a consultant to the Vatican Secretariat for Communications. He is a New York Times best-selling author and frequent commentator on the life and teachings of Jesus and on Ignatian spirituality. His books include The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, Between Heaven and Mirth, Why Joy, Humor, and Laughter Are at the Heart of the Spiritual Life, and Building a Bridge, How the Catholic Church and the LGBT Community Can Enter into a Relationship of Respect, Compassion, and Sensitivity. Father Martin has also written for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. He is a regular commentator in the national and international media, having appeared on major radio and television networks and in venues as diverse as National Public Radio, Fox TV, the BBC, the History Channel, and Vatican Radio. And during the run of the Colbert Report, he also served as the official chaplain to the Colbert Nation. So please help me in welcoming Father James Martin.
Thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for that nice coronavirus welcome. I am, as you heard, quarantined. I was in the Holy Land last week for 10 days, and we visited Bethlehem. And Bethlehem was closed the day after we were there, which is why I'm speaking to you from my bedroom. So what I thought I'd do, as you heard, I can give you a little introduction on how the Catholic Church can show respect and welcome to LGBT people for a little bit, and then I thought we could answer some questions, because I much prefer answering questions. So basically, one of the more recent challenges for Catholic institutions, parishes, schools, retreat houses, dioceses, is how to welcome LGBT people, as well as families with LGBT members. But that challenge can also be where a lot of grace abounds. Because LGBT Catholics have felt so excluded from their own church that really any sort of welcome is really something that can help them go to Mass again, return them to the faith, and even help them believe in God again. Over the past few years, unfortunately, I've heard some really terrible stories about how LGBT Catholics are made to feel unwelcome in their parishes, and I'm sure you've heard the same kinds of stories. Just a few months ago, a woman told me that when she came out as a lesbian to her college chaplain, campus ministry, he told her, believe it or not, that he had prayed his whole priesthood that he would never meet anyone who was gay. So you can imagine how that made her feel. But cruelty doesn't end at the doors of the church or in a Catholic school or university. Last year, a woman contacted me to ask if I knew any compassionate priests in her diocese, because she was a nurse in a hospice where a Catholic patient was dying, and the local parish priest assigned to the hospice was refusing to anoint him because he was gay. So people really feel excluded. Parents feel the same way. Families feel the same way. But there's also stories of grace in our church as well. 2 years ago, a young man told me that the first person he came out to was a priest in his college. And the first thing the priest said was, God loves you and the church accepts you. And this young man told me that literally saved my life. So, more and more, I think there are places, like your school, where people feel welcome, people feel like they can talk about the issue, and people feel like they're part of the church. But, so much of it depends on where you happen to live. If you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, and you live in a big city, or you live near a college like yours, which is welcoming and open, you're in luck, right? But if you live in a small parish or a place where you have a homophobic pastor who's either homophobic, overtly or kind of silently, then you're out of luck. And the way that Catholics are welcomed or not welcomed in Catholic institutions and their parishes and schools affects not only their outlook on the church, but their outlook on the faith and on God. So what can help the church be more welcoming and respectful? How can all of us help make the church a home for LGBT Catholics and their families? The following observations are based not only on conversations with LGBT people, but on the experience of LGBT ministries and outreach groups that I consulted. I mean, none of this goes against church teaching. It's all basically how to reach out to these people. So I want to talk about two areas. One, some fundamental insights for Catholic institutions. And second, what best practices can be. The first insight and then best practices. So first, the insights. Number one, they're Catholic, right? I mean, we have to remember that LGBT people and their families are baptized Catholics. They're as Catholic as Pope Francis, your local bishop, or me, right? Or anybody in that room right now. So it's not a question of making them Catholic. The most important thing to do maybe for LGBT Catholics is to welcome them into what is already their church, right? It's their church too. Second, they don't choose their orientation. Sadly, many people still believe that people choose their sexual orientation, despite the testimony of, pretty much every reputable psychiatrist and psychologist. You don't choose your orientation. So it's not something to blame on people, far less is it a sin. Third, they've often been treated like lepers in the church, right? We should never underestimate the pain that LGBT people have experienced, not only in society at large, but at the church. I mean, there's incredible statistics that we need to remind ourselves of. In the U.S., lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide as their straight counterparts. 40% of transgender people in the U.S. have attempted suicide. I mean, that's a huge number. And, one study shows that one important reason that LGBT youth are homeless is because they come from families who reject them for religious reasons, right? So we need to be aware of the stigmatizing language and the effect that it has. We really need to be careful about the way the church treats LGBT people and speaks about them. Parents of LGBT kids find this similar. Parents of LGBT children feel similar pain, right? They may suffer shame in front of relatives and friends. It can be confusing, frightening, and embarrassing for parents to accept the reality of their children's orientation or gender identity. Sometimes they feel that they have to choose between the church and their child. One mother said, "I felt like it was between God and my child," right? A fourth insight, LGBT people bring gifts to the church. And like any group, LGBT people bring special gifts to the church, right? I mean, if you said, what about young people or Hispanics or older people or veterans? They bring unique gifts to the church. So I know it's wrong to generalize, but for a group that has been seen in a really negative light, what would those gifts be? Well, one might be compassion, right? I mean, people who have been marginalized so long naturally feel compassion for people on the margins. Their compassion is a real gift. I mean, if you think about it, if you were bullied as a child, right, wouldn't you feel naturally more sympathetic to people who are being bullied, right? It's the same for LGBT people. They often feel this great compassion for people on the margins. So they bring gifts. Fifth insight, they long to know God. Like many Catholics, some LGBT people struggle with various aspects of the church's teaching, right? Like a lot of Catholics, even straight Catholics. At the same time, many aren't as focused on those issues as people think. Many want something simpler. They simply want to be a part of the church. They want to know God. They want to experience Jesus Christ in the sacrament. So treat them like that. Treat them like parishioners, as Catholics, not as protesters. Help LGBT people and their families fulfill their deepest desires, which is to know God. Finally, the last insight, they're loved by God. Okay, God loves them. So should we. And I don't mean a stingy, grudging, judgmental, conditional, half-hearted love. I mean real love. Loving them as friends. Celebrating them with them when life is sweet, suffering with them when life is bitter, as any friend would. Right? So those are 6 insights, just kind of fundamental insights that I think we need to all learn in the church about LGBT people. Now, with those insights in mind, how can we reach out? What are some best practices for Catholic institutions? Now, I know you're probably thinking about it in terms of colleges and universities, but what can a Catholic institution in general do, right? Parishes, schools, retreat houses. First, I would say examine your own attitudes towards LGBT people, right? Do you believe that an LGBT person is more sinful simply because they're LGBT? Do you you hold the parents of a gay teen responsible for a gay teen's orientation? You think that people are transgender only because it's fashion? Also, are you holding the LGBT community to the same standards as the straight community? With LGBT people, we tend to focus on whether or not they're conforming to the church's teaching on sexual morality. Are you doing the same with straight Christians? For example, those who are living together before being married or practicing birth rituals. The idea is, you need to be consistent about whose lives get scrutinized. So think about your attitudes towards that. Second best practice, a really obvious thing, listen to them. Listen to the experiences of LGBT Catholics and their parents and families, right? If you don't know what to say, you might ask, what was it like growing up as a gay boy in our church? What is it like being a lesbian Catholic? And an important question, what is it like being a transgender person? We still know so little about the transgender experience that we really need to listen. And speak to the parents of LGBT people too. You might say, what is it like to have a gay child at the Catholic Church? Has the church helped you or hurt you? And how is your understanding of God changed? Right? Overall, when you're participating in any sort of ministry with LGBT people or meeting with an LGBT person one-on-one, begin with their experiences, right? Listen to them, encounter them. Look at the way that Jesus treats people who feel like they're on the margins, right? Like the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, or the Roman centurion, right? He listens to them, he engages them, he asks them questions, right? I think if the church listened to LGBT people, 90% of the homophobia would disappear. Third best practice, acknowledge them in homilies, parish presentations, school clubs, as full members of the church, without judgment, and not as fallen away Catholics. Just mentioning them in conversation, sometimes in terms of homilies, I'll say something like, God loves us all, whether we're young or old, rich or poor, straight or LGBT, right? In college brochures, just talking about LGBT person or showing their faces or talking about, gay straight alliances, really sends a signal to people that they're acknowledged, that they're part of the community, that they're valuable. 4, apologize to them. I always tell people if LGBT Catholics or families have been harmed in the name of the church by homophobic comments or attitudes and decisions, apologize, right? For those of you who are in the church, who represent the church in some way, you can apologize. It doesn't solve everything, but it certainly is a start. 5, don't reduce gays and lesbians to the call to chastity that we all share as Christians, right? LGBT people are more than their sexual lives, but sometimes it's all they hear about. So remember not to focus solely on sexuality, but on the many other joys and sorrows that they have in their lives. They lead rich lives. Many LGBT Catholics are parents themselves or are caring for aging parents, right? We never think about that. They have regular lives like everybody else. Many help the poor in their community. Many are involved in civic and charitable organizations. They're often deeply involved in the life of the Catholic Church. We'll see them in their totality, not just simply as sexual beings. 6, include them in all ministries in the church. As I've mentioned, there's a tendency to focus on the sexual morality of LGBT Catholics, which is wrong because first, you have no idea what their sexual lives are like. And second, even if they are falling short, they're not the only ones. Like everyone else in the church who does not live up to the Gospels, which is everybody, LGBT people should be invited into all ministries in the church, right? And by the way, by not welcoming them into all ministries, the church misses out on their gifts, right? We're missing out on the great gifts that they bring. 7, acknowledge their individual gifts. So not only should we acknowledge them as a group, right? Bring compassion, perseverance, and forgiveness. We should acknowledge them individually. We should raise them up. For example, one of the cantors in my parish, and the parish in New York City is a guy named Philip. He has this beautiful voice, and he's been part of our worship for 20 years, right? You probably have similar people in your school, right? Raise them up, acknowledge them, praise them. Don't hide their light under your bushel basket. 8th best practice, invite everyone in the Catholic institution or in your school to welcome them. You may have a welcoming president of your school and provost and deans, but what about everybody else, right? Does the person who answers the phone, at the school, know what to say when someone asks about a gay, straight, or alliance, right? If you're in a parish, are the gay adult children of the deceased treated with the same respect as others? Does everyone know, how to treat LGBT people? Because the voice of your school, the voice of your parish, the voice of your Catholic is not just that of your pastor or your president or your principal, but everyone's. And by not welcoming and excluding LGBT Catholics, the church is falling short of its call to be God's family. You are tearing apart the body of Christ, right? And not in a good way. 9, something that I think every Catholic institution can do, sponsor special events or outreach programs. Like everybody else, LGBT Catholics want to feel like they're part of the church, right? Or part of the school, or part of the parish. And as for all of its children, the onus is on the church to invite them into that community. But for many LGBT people, the church has not been a place of welcome. So specific LGBT events and outreach programs and groups, in schools like Gay Straight Alliance and LGBT clubs are helpful to bridge the gap between your intentions and their suspicions. And there's lots of different possibilities. A parish could offer a massive welcome. A high school could have a Gay Straight Alliance. A college could have, an LGBT center and have LGBT courses that talk about LGBT history, right? So there's many different kinds of models. You have to discern what's right for your school or for your parish, or retreat house, or college. As for parents, one mother said when I asked what I should say to you tonight, the most important thing is to give parents a safe, welcoming space to share their stories, right? So many people feel alone and don't think anyone else is going through this, right? So it's just a place where parents can feel welcome, right? Parents of the students, for example, know that they need to feel welcome or should feel welcome in the church and the school. Finally, I would say number 10 in terms of best practices, advocate for them. There are many times when the Catholic Church and its institutions can provide a moral voice for this persecuted community. And I'm not talking about hot button topics like same-sex marriage. I'm talking about countries, for example, where, as you know, in 70 countries, it's illegal to engage in same-sex relations. And in 6 countries, according to Human Rights Watch, you can be executed for being gay, right? In these countries, I often try to remind people, these are life issues, right? We're fond of talking about, as we should, pro-life issues. These are life issues. In other countries, like our country, it may be incidents of teen suicides or hate crimes or bullying. So there's a lot of opportunities for the church, Catholic schools, to stand with LGBT people worldwide who are being persecuted. The Catechism says every sign of unjust discrimination must be avoided when it comes to LGBT people. Do we really believe this? The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith wrote in 1986, this is really strong, it is deplorable that homosexual persons have been and are the object of violent speech and action. Such treatment deserves condemnation from the church pastors whenever it occurs, right? That's really strong. That's part of what it means to be Christian, standing up for the marginalized, the persecuted, the beaten down. And it's really shocking, I would say, how little the Catholic Church has done. So let LGBT people in your school know that you stand with them. Mention them in school presentations and homilies during campus ministry. Be prophetic, be courageous, be like Jesus. Because if we're not trying to be like Jesus, what's the point? And remember, in his public ministry, Jesus is continually reaching out to people on the margins, right? Take the story of the woman at the well, right? The Samaritan woman. Here's someone who we shouldn't be talking to at all. 1, because she's a woman, 2, because she's a Samaritan. What does he do? He listens to her. He encounters her. He hears her story, right? And then he, in a sense, commissions her to be a disciple. So, or the Roman centurion, in Capernaum, where I just was a week ago. He meets someone who's not even Jewish and who needs healing for his servant. I'm sure you all know this story. So what does Jesus do? Does Jesus condemn him for being a sinner because he doesn't even believe in one God? No, he listens to him, he encounters him, he hears what the guy has to say, and then he praises the man's faith is greater than all in Israel, and then he heals the man's servant. So, this guy's not even Jewish, and Jesus talks to him and encounters him. This is the way that Jesus encounters people who feel like they're on the margins, right? Because the movement for Jesus is from the outside in. He's always bringing people from the outside in, and he's bringing the disciples out, right? So he's bringing people together. He's creating a community. Because for Jesus, there's no us and them, right? There's just us. There's just us. So those are 6 insights and 10 best practices that I hope might help you in your school. And now I'd like to answer your questions if that's okay. Thanks very much. Well, the second question is easy. A couple things. Number one, homosexuality was not thought about in the same way as we understand it now, right? I mean, they simply didn't understand it in the same way. And, secondly, I can say that, this is just from the Gospels. Jesus apparently wasn't that as interested in sort of sexual morality. That's not to say it was unimportant, but, he talks about divorce, right, pretty strongly. But he doesn't focus on sexual morality as much as he does on helping the poor and, caring for the sick and those kinds of things. So it didn't seem to be, as important to him as other topics. I think that what gives me hope? Well, the main thing that gives me hope is Christ is risen, right? The resurrection. Nothing is impossible with God. Love triumphs over hate. Hope triumphs over despair, right? Life triumphs over death. And so, that's the essential message of our church, a message of hope. But I would say, that I have a lot of hope when it comes to LGBT stuff. The people that are critiquing this ministry it's a very small but proud minority, right? You have Pope Francis, for example, who is the first Pope ever to use the word gay. He's talked about, his 5 most famous words are, "Who am I to judge?" Right? He has gay friends. From a personal standpoint, he met with me for half an hour last September in the Apostolic Palace, and he didn't have to do that. So he's showing a lot of hope. And then he too is also appointing cardinals and archbishops and bishops who are much more welcoming to LGBT people. So that gives me hope, Pope Francis and what he's doing. But also, remember that, as more and more people come out in the church, more and more people are, more and more families are affected, right? And as more and more families are affected, more and more parishes and high schools and colleges are affected. And so even if, God forbid, Pope Francis dies tomorrow and he's replaced by someone who's not as open, that other trend is going to continue. Right? So I really have a lot of hope there. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on. And the critiques that I get, they don't really bother me. Yeah, that's a good question. There have been some, people who have been very good about sort of pushing me. I think one thing I needed to, be clearer about was that, I'm not trying to, challenge any church teaching. As a priest, I'm trying to work with the boundaries of that. But I also think that I was challenged a lot by LGBT people, LGBT Catholics, who said that in the first edition of my book, Building a Bridge, that I didn't give proper sort of place for people who really felt like they needed to be a little more vocal in their protest. So the first book was all of it, and it's true. I think it's important to build bridges, right, and never to be rude or anything. But this group actually in a parish next door, right next door to our community, an LGBT group, in a parish next door to our community, said, when you talk about dialogue with church leaders, that's fine for you, Jim. We don't have any access to church leaders, and some of our work needs to be much more vocal. So sort of understanding the charism for that in the church. I think I've been challenged on that. And then I think, frankly, I've just learned a lot about the way that these ministries are sort of lived out and how much is really being done on the grassroots level, which is it wasn't so much challenging, I think, as learning what's going on. It's pretty exciting. There's a lot of great groups out there. Oh, what a great question. I would certainly include many more statistics about how people are persecuted, executed, beaten, arrested. I think those are I put some of them in the second edition, but I've been stunned at kind of the extent of persecution of LGBT people worldwide. I think, in the United States, we tend to think of it as hate crimes, bullying, suicides, but, these are life and death issues. And there are some really strong things that are said. Like, for example, I was reading in Poland, some of the archbishops called it, compared, LGBT marches to the Nazis. So it's really strong stuff. So I might have sort of broadened it for the third edition to talk a little bit about things kind of internationally. I did. Yeah, I can explain. I don't agree with it, but I can explain the theological argument. The theological argument is that, we're born male and female, period. And that to change that would be against God's plan. That's the theological argument. But of course, we know a lot more about, I'm not an expert, I'm not a biologist or an endocrinologist, but there are a lot of people who, it's not simply male and female. This is, in terms of the scientific outlook. And I think, here's the thing, in terms of transgender, I'm not an expert, right? But in terms of that issue, I think what I disagree with is coming up with policies so quickly when society at large and the scientific community and the religious community are still learning about it, right? So we're still learning. What we need to do is listen and learn before we make any sort of policies like that. That's my primary objection to that we don't know enough about it from the scientific point of view, the psychological point of view, the physiological point of view, to draw those conclusions. Yeah, well, I'm not going to challenge church teaching on gay marriage, and I'm not going to challenge church teaching on anything. I will say, however, that this is something that a lot of Catholic families are grappling with, right? And this is something that families see their child, gay, growing up gay, and desiring a partner, and desiring not to be alone. And, the church has to reflect on, is this love or not? I'll tell you a story. I know a gay couple. I know many gay couples. I know a gay couple in New York. And currently, one of them right now is dying of cancer. And they've been together for about 20 or 30 years. And they've taken care of one another. And the fellow who's well is now taking care of his partner, has nursed him for the last 2 years through his treatment, his surgery, has gone with him to wards, right? And I think the church has to ask the question, is this love or not? So I think that's the question the church needs to ask when it comes to those relationships. The couple that I was talking about, they are, if they weren't legally married, their names are Carlos and Jim. Jim wouldn't be able to, he's been his partner for 30 years. He wouldn't be able to kind of make sort of decisions, in terms of healthcare as well. So yeah, it's a real issue for a lot of people. Yeah, it does. Now, normally it's not the parents that get into trouble. It's the person himself or herself, who gets married. But there have been cases where parents have been attacked. There's a woman who was fired from her job named Shelley Fitzgerald at Roncalli High School in Indianapolis. And the father was fired too, her father, who's a straight man who's married, who was, helping out with retreats because he supported her. I think that the difficulty is this. The difficulty is that, look, the church does have a right, and Catholic institutions have a right to say that people need to follow certain rules and regulations. The problem is that those rules are applied selectively. All right. I mean, we do not do the same thing with couples who get married before, living together before being married. I mean, imagine, think of all the teachers and professors and, Catholic employees, who are living together before being married, and no one really bothers with them. They certainly don't get fired. Or people that are using birth control, or people that don't go to mass on Sundays, right? Or people that don't give to the poor. I mean, there's a whole constellation of teachings that are really important, but we tend to focus only on sexual morality and only on the sexual morality of LGBT people. So that's the problem. It's the selectivity and the kind of focus on the LGBT person that is problematic. Yeah, I mean, non-binary people, genderqueer, queer. I mean, it's the sort of new world, and I'm sometimes not familiar with all the terms, but I mean, I would say, look, it's about what Jesuit schools called cura personalis, care for the person. So no matter who the person is, right? I mean, LGBTQ, genderqueer, non-binary, right? It's caring for them as beloved creatures of God, right? Beloved children of God. And so, people's sexuality, runs the spectrum. These days, people in terms of their gender identity and their gender identification, are very varied, and yet they're all beloved children of God. And I think that's the most important thing. And so to single people out and say, because you're non-binary, I mean, we don't do that to, for example, I have a friend who works as the Catholic chaplain of San Quentin prison, okay? He gives communion to serial killers. So if we can accept serial killers as part of the church, can we accept non-binary people? I'll tell you a story. He has some transgender people in the jail, in the prison, who are in the prison choir, right? So that's San Quentin, maximum security prison with death row. And some of the guys came up to my friend, the chaplain, and said, well, we really object to people who are, gay, who are in the parish choir, right? So the prisoners were objecting to some gay men in the parish choir. And my friend, who's the chaplain, said, you know what, it is true that, because they talked about the Bible. He said, it is true that the Bible is against homosexual acts. He said, it's also against murder. So this double standard, I mean, for me, that's like a parable. You have serial killers complaining. So, it's to answer your question, and I'm not trying to make fun of your question at all. It's a very good question. But I guess what I'm saying is, we need to look at everybody, including non-binary people, as children of God, and listen to them and welcome them. And I say a couple things. I never, I try never to kind of, denigrate or dismiss someone's feelings, right? I'm not going to say you shouldn't feel like that, right? Because people have really endured a lot of pain. I mean, I hear the most incredible stories. It just blows my mind, the kind of things that people tell me that they're told. And so, I say I understand that. I understand why you would distance yourself from the church, or, as a friend of mine said, I didn't fall away from the church fell away from me, But I also say, look, I understand that, but the way I look at it is this, you are just as much a part of the church as the Pope, as your bishop, as your priest. You're baptized, period. And your baptismal certificate is your membership in the church, right? Period. So I always say, the other way of looking at it is, don't let people kick you out of your own church, right? Can you be 11? Can you work for change, right? And the church has a lot more problems than, simply the way it treats LGBT people. I mean, you don't need any reminding, sex abuse crisis and a million other things, right? So the church is lacking in other ways. But, I say to people, you were called into the church by Jesus Christ at your baptism, and at a particular time too. And there might be a reason for you to be in the church right now, to act as leaven, even though it's hard. So I try to do both. I try to listen to their heart, but I also try to remind them of their rightful place in the church, thanks to the sacrament of baptism. The confusion, I don't know how it's confusing. I mean, respect, compassion, and sensitivity, period. That confusion is the term that is used against Pope Francis too. That's the insult. He's not. I mean, Pope Francis is pretty clear about what he's trying to do. You know, make us a more merciful, tender-hearted, loving church. That's not confusing to anybody who understands what mercy is. And I don't think that what I'm doing is that confusing. I've been pretty clear about what I'm trying to do. It's basically a way for people to just dismiss it, right? I mean, I've said that I'm not going against church teaching. I'm trying to, just help people treat these people like human beings. I don't know why that's so confusing to people. So I think it's baloney. Well, I mean, I think that's a good point. Some people, can't even abide by the term LGBT or rainbow. And I mean, look, it's like saying, I refuse to call African American and Black. I'm not calling them Negroes because that's what I want to call them. I mean, it's just rude. I mean, the group has more or less said that this is what they want to be called. So it's just simple respect. And the alternatives, struggling with same-sex attraction, I mean, how is that any better? Especially if the group says that they don't want to be called that. The answer to your question, though, is how do you deal with people who are intransigent and who just won't listen? Well, how did Jesus deal with them? Shake the dust off your feet and go on. I mean, you're not mean to them and you're respectful, of course, and charitable, but Jesus said if the town doesn't welcome you, you shake the dust off your feet and you move on, right? And you go to where there is fruit, right? And for example, in your situation, are you a professor there? Yeah, okay. So I mean, perfect. So you continue to do your work. You know what I mean? You continue to minister to all sorts of people in campus ministry, but you minister also to the LGBT kids as well. And look, I always say, I mean, Jesus, not everybody liked Jesus, right? I mean, there's a reason he was crucified, and so why should we expect any different? I mean, Dorothy Day used to say that all the time, I mean, if they treated Jesus this way, why should we expect any different? But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be open to people and to try to, in a gentle way, persuade them and invite them to see why you're using those terms, why a rainbow is important, right? I mean, but if people are intransigent, a lot of it is because of fear. It's mainly fear of the other, fear of the LGBT person as other, as different, as disgusting, as strange, as threatening. And a lot of times it's fear of a person's own complicated sexuality. The people who have been the most vociferous in their opposition to this have been so-called ex-gays, or people who, are struggling with their own sexuality. And, it's because they don't want to deal with it interiorly. And so I've talked to psychologists about this just the other day. And so it's easier to sort of put it outside. So rather than dealing with a conflict about their own sexuality, whether or not they're homosexual or they're struggling with that, or someone in their family, right? They externalize it. It's a lot easier to externalize. I see it all the time. Again, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure stuff out, right? And so it's often not about you, it's about them. And, while you never cruel to them or mean to them or dismissive of them, you also don't let them stop you from doing the right thing. Jesus continued on, even though the scribes and the Pharisees were against him. So that's the model. Oh yeah, and I mean, look, I'm just one person. I'm not an organization. Here I am in my bedroom. It's not like I'm in some, like the James Martin Center. I mean, so I'm just one person doing what I can. There are a lot of groups that do it differently and that are much more organized, right? For example, there's a great group which I love called Fortunate Families. I don't know if you've heard of them, and it's a group that helps families with LGBT. It's Catholic LGBT Catholic families. They're all over the country. They do great work. I don't do that kind of work. I mean, I certainly support that kind of work, but I'm not kind of organizing. I am running, though. I'm helping to run an LGBT Catholic ministry conference at Fordham, to which you're all invited to, next summer, assuming that we're all still alive then, or that it can go on. But so, I'm trying to do, the question is, I do collaborate with them. I try to help them, and because we're all kind of moving towards the same goal in different ways, and using different approaches. I mean, my approach is certainly within the church. Do you know what I mean? It is within the church. I'm a Jesuit. I'm a priest. I'm not going to challenge anything, but there's a lot you can do, within the church. And I think that, I've, at every step of the way, I've gotten permission from my Jesuit superiors to do this. So that's a little different than some of the groups, who are, they're not priests and they're not religious, and so they don't have to do it in that particular way. But this is the way I not only choose to do it, but have to do it. Something with you interiorly on my last retreat, I was sort of imagining myself with Jesus, as one does on retreat, and I said to him, well, maybe it's time to move on to a new kind of ministry. Not that I would stop doing it, but that kind of a little bit of a shift. And in my prayer, I heard Jesus say to me, why don't you let me decide that? And then a couple months later, I had that meeting with the Pope. So that to me seemed like a pretty clear message. Yeah, I think it would make a huge difference. And that's a long conversation. I've written about that. I mean, one of the main reasons they don't come out is because they're afraid, and, there's a conflation of pedophilia and homosexuality, and also, their bishops and their religious superiors tell them, no, I don't want you to do that, because they're afraid. Absolutely, I think it would make a big difference. And I'm not talking, these are men who are celibate and chaste, right? So they are living according to their vows and their promises, right? And I think it would be a huge step forward. Now, I don't think they need to talk about it all the time, but, to just have some role models for LGBT kids. And I often say, imagine if, there was a bullying or a hate crime going on in a parish, right? I mean, imagine the witness that a gay priest who maybe himself was bullied when he was younger could give to that parish. So I do think it would change things. And I think a significant number of priests, again, who are celibate and chaste, are gay. And a significant number of women religious and men religious are gay. It's always been that way. Again, they're celibate and they're chaste. And so, by rights, we should be praising them because they're living according to the catechism. So the idea that they should be, denigrated or sort of, mocked is just really shocking to me. I don't know if it's ever going to, I don't know when it's going to happen. I think eventually it would, but it's not happening now, that's for sure. Thanks. I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you for letting me thank you for coming. I know with the coronavirus, you're not supposed to be in groups, but thank you for doing that. You're all sitting sufficiently far apart, like good Catholics. Second, please keep me in your prayers. I'd appreciate your prayers. And third, if possible, I like to do this with groups. If you guys, at some point, if someone could take a picture, maybe you guys could all gather together. I think it's good to share on social media, the fact that there are these kind of conversations going on. But I think because of the size of the group, if you could kind of all gather together and maybe take a group picture, that would be nice. So keep me in your prayers, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.